I'm Colby Clark, and this is my Chapter 3 research presentation for Marymount University IT 20A on the strengths, weaknesses, and security impact of HIPAA and PCI-DSS. For the last several decades, computer hacking, malware, social engineering, and other methods of system compromise and data theft have been on a steeply increasing trend, both in volume and in monetary impact. The situation has threatened all entities and resource types. It has resulted in the development of regulatory requirements from various sources attempting to deal with the problem, but the regulations do not quickly adapt to the evolving technologies or to the advancing threat landscape. These regulatory requirements provide a combination of vague mandates in some areas and overly specific criteria in other areas that, when combined, have not successfully solved the hacking problem nor assured data security and privacy. PCI-DSS and HIPAA are two of the most notable regulations having teeth and impacting affected organizations. PCI is considered the most specific of regulatory requirements, and HIPAA is considered to be amongst the most vague. These regulations have the combined net effect of driving the implementation of ineffective security controls that focus more on the compliance side of things than security, but leave unresolved security gaps and unprotected data available to be compromised by attackers. Further, the regulations and punishments for noncompliance are written in such a way as to focus mostly on penalizing the victims of attacks. However, they provide no requirements or penalties for hardware and software vendors that create vulnerable products that are the targets of compromise. Moreover, the regulations also do very little to specifically protect the actual data that is the subject of the regulation. Instead, they provide specific requirements to prevent or detect a subset of attack methods, or are simply too vague to discern the specific controls. As such, notwithstanding the ever-increasing regulatory requirements focusing on data and privacy breaches of protected data, it continues to occur. This study will survey cybersecurity professionals who have a minimum baseline of cybersecurity and responsive regulatory compliance experience. It will gather information about their perceptions of HIPAA and PCI as drivers for cybersecurity and the respective impact on one, broadly within the computing environments, two, specifically at individual control layers, and three, in addressing the core regulatory concerns of establishing data security and privacy within the impacted entities. This research is being carried out to quantitatively enumerate the impact of HIPAA and PCI regulatory requirements on the actual security controls within their respective environments as perceived by the respondents. More specifically, I will survey a sample of security professionals across various industries who have experience in either PCI or HIPAA and a sufficient background in cybersecurity, which must be at least 5 years. They will be asked key questions informing this assessment and performing and permitting the quantitative analysis of the information gathered. Qualtrics will be used to collect and analyze the data from respondents. Quantitative research has been chosen as the research method to empirically gather survey information that can be used to compile and calculate the numerical confidence level of participants regarding the efficacy of HIPAA and PCI regulations on cybersecurity, and specifically on data security. The theory of quantitative research is a framework that uses the quantitative data to systematically investigate and perform statistical analysis to test hypotheses or measure variables. It emphasizes objectivity, generalizability, and replicability, and it facilitates deductive reasoning to derive conclusions and mathematical expressions of quantitative relationships based on empirical evidence or observations. Quantitative research inherently assumes linearity and predictability in relationships, but it has a downside of potentially being limited in capturing complex and subjective experiences. Key principles and benefits of quantitative research include the following high-level items: hypothesis testing, measurement and quantification, statistical analysis, generalizing of results, and the reliability and validity of results, as well as the reproducibility of results. The survey participants will be recruited via LinkedIn, Marymount University email, and other methods. The web-based surveys will ask predetermined questions with a combination of yes/no answers and a matrix format of questions to provide a choice of numerical scores identifying the perceived direct or indirect impact of PCI and HIPAA regulatory requirements at each security control layer to support a quantitative assessment. Statistical analysis and interpretation will then be performed to calculate the respective impacts, strengths, and weaknesses of the regulatory requirements on each control layer, the aggregated security within the organization, and the data security posture. This slide enumerates the web-based survey questions that will be used to elicit responses in the appropriate formats and enable mathematical calculations and quantitative study. No sampling approach will be used in this research as the goal is to obtain and comprehensively analyze the responses from as many respondents in as many industry verticals as possible, so long as they meet the baseline requirements. This study hopes to include qualified cybersecurity professionals working in the public and private sectors, such as manufacturing, retail, healthcare, hospitality, food services, professional services, education, insurance, banking, government, technology, and others. The goal is to get at least 30 respondents across at least 5 industry verticals to ensure adequate representation and to reduce the bias caused by a focus that would be too narrow on a single industry vertical. Analysis will be performed both within and across industry verticals in which respondents are involved to analyze the commonalities, differences, and trends related to cybersecurity and PCI and HIPAA compliance. The quantitative data will be collected via the Qualtrics survey and analyzed also within Qualtrics. It will explore the similarities and differences within industry verticals and across industry verticals, and also individually for each research question for each technology layer, and as well as an aggregate for each technology layer and across the technology layers in order to answer the research questions. Research question 1 is, to what extent have PCI or HIPAA been drivers for positive, meaningful impact at each security control layer, whether direct or indirect, thus indicating they are specifically responsible for enhancements in security controls? And research question 2 is, to what extent have PCI and HIPAA been an inverse driver or resulted in a negative impact on each security control layer, thus indicating they impair the implementation of security controls? And 3, to what extent have PCI and HIPAA been drivers for protecting data security and privacy, their core mission? The goal is to identify the respondent's opinion of the correlation between the research questions and the impact on control layers. The impacts will be measured individually and in aggregate across all control layers to determine if HIPAA and PCI ultimately have either a direct or indirect correlation, whether positive, negative, or neutral, on security controls and on data privacy. Qualtrics will assist in the analysis of the data collection and the respective statistical impacts, such as equations, means, averages, and standard deviations, etc. Two-variable linear regression will be used to plot the correlations and perform analysis on the relationships between the independent variables, such as regulatory requirements, and the dependent variables, which is the impact on the data security and privacy, while controlling for the other variables, which is at each control layer. More specifically, the goal is to use the two-variable regression to determine whether the multifaceted indirect or direct requirements of HIPAA on the various control layers ultimately have the impact of protecting data security and privacy. The data is ultimately a quantitative measurement of the subjective opinions and perceptions of security experts who respond to the surveys. The data is as trustworthy as the survey respondents are genuine and truthful in responding to the survey. Considering senior security professionals with an interest in improving security controls and regulatory compliance will be chosen, the data is considered to be trustworthy. The ethical considerations for this research are minimal. There's no direct impact on human populations. The act of revealing this information does not make anyone less secure, as attackers already know the regulations are ineffective anyway and continually exploit weak security controls and steal data. The data gathered will be used to assist in the improvement of credit card and medical record security and regulatory compliance requirements, and to help the entities assess the potential weaknesses in each security control layer. Essentially, there's no additional risk to the public. This research will be the first of its kind to measure the perceived impact based on the observations of knowledgeable insiders regarding the most notable regulatory compliance requirements as of 2025, which has stated our HIPAA and PCI, on the organizations as a whole and at each common security control layer implemented within the security programs in real-world entities. This is a very important study that will help organizations focus on where the rubber meets the road for cybersecurity programs and the controls influenced or inspired by HIPAA and PCI. And it holds these regulations accountable for their actual results and the true impact on data security and privacy. More specifically, it will enable security teams and leadership to more authoritatively plan for notable gaps in security controls that might not be emphasized by PCI and HIPAA compliance, which can be used by attackers to compromise the organizations and steal data. Moreover, considering the propensity of PCI and HIPAA to focus on the implementation of security controls that can create a secure environment and the lack of specific focus on the security of the data itself, this study will help organizations identify and close these gaps.